A special prosecutor is appointed to investigate Russian efforts to influence the U.S. election as the media compares the situation to Watergate. With analysis is a man who was there. Columnist, senior advisor to 3 presidents, and author of the new book, Nixon's White House Wars, Pat Buchanan is here. And President Trump will meet with Pope Francis at the Vatican next week on his first foreign trip. What should we expect from the meeting? With an insider's perspective, former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Jim Nicholson is here. And finally, we'll discuss the deep connection between dads and their kids. Pediatrician and author of the book Hero, Being the Strong Father Your Children Need, Dr. Meg Meeker joins us. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Pat Buchanan, Jim Nicholson, and Dr. Meg Meeker are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send us a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout. Or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. It was another tumultuous week for President Donald Trump as the Justice Department appointed a special prosecutor to investigate alleged collusion between Russia and Trump's presidential campaign. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller has been put in charge of the investigation, giving him sweeping powers and the authority to prosecute any crimes uncovered in the probe. That could include an investigation into Trump's controversial firing of FBI Director James Comey last week. On Thursday, the president said he respected the decision to appoint a special counsel, but then repeated that the investigation was a witch hunt and that it's time to get on with the business of the American people.
We have to get back to running this country really, really well. We've made tremendous progress in the last 100 and some odd days, tremendous progress. And you see job numbers, you see all of the production that's starting, plants starting to open again, haven't been open in years. I'm very proud of it. That's what I want to be focused on, because believe me, there's no collusion. Russia is fine, but whether it's Russia or anybody else, my total priority, believe me, is the United States of America. So thank you very much.
More on this and the reverberations in Washington with Pat Buchanan in our next segment. And given all the Beltway controversy surrounding President Trump, his first foreign trip might afford him a needed reset. Earlier this week, Pope Francis commented on the upcoming meeting with Trump, saying he would look for open doors to find common ground, particularly on pro-life and family issues, as well as religious liberty. When asked about climate change and illegal immigration, 2 issues on which they have differing opinions, Francis said, quote, "I never make a judgment about a person without listening to them," end quote. Last year, in an apparent reference to Trump's campaign promise to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, the Pope said, "A person who thinks only about building walls wherever they may be and not building bridges is not Christian." Trump responded that he didn't like fighting with the Pope, but he said no leader, especially a religious leader, should have the right to question another man's religion or faith. While in Portugal last weekend, Pope Francis repeated themes heard throughout his pontificate, urging the faithful to spread peace and justice to the peripheries and to tear down all walls. More on the meeting between the Pope and the President later in the show. Meanwhile, according to multiple reports and our own sources, President Trump intends to nominate Callista Gingrich as U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. The wife of former U.S. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich is a lifelong Catholic, former congressional aide, and currently president of Gingrich Productions. Together, she and her husband produced an acclaimed documentary about Pope St. John Paul II's 1979 visit to his native Poland, entitled 9 Days That Changed the World. The White House has not confirmed the nomination, and the Gingriches said they are being very cautious about making public comments at this time. We'll keep you updated on this story. And the Trump administration has implemented an expanded Mexico City policy to ensure that U.S. dollars do not go towards the promotion or procurement of abortions abroad. The executive order, titled Protecting Life in Global Health Assistance, withholds federal funds from foreign non-governmental organizations. First announced by President Ronald Reagan at a 1984 UN conference in Mexico City, the policy only applied to family planning programs. According to the State Department, the new expanded Trump policy applies to international health programs such as those for HIV/AIDS, maternal and child care, malaria, global health security, as well as family planning and reproductive health services. The recent murder of a German woman who converted to Christianity from Islam is highlighting the plight of Christian converts in Germany. According to a report by German public broadcasting, converts face violence and intimidation from Muslim migrants to the country. The murdered woman, the mother of 4, was stabbed by a Muslim assailant on the street in front of her children. The attacker was considered by authorities to be mentally unstable and very religious. They pointed to the woman's conversion as a possible motive. The report noted that many converts face intimidation, including being forced to listen to Quranic verses, physical and verbal abuse, and death threats for not wearing headscarves or for displaying a cross. According to a recent study of Muslims who convert to Christianity in Germany, more than half surveyed claim they've been physically attacked, and 80% say they have been repeatedly attacked. In southern Italy this week, authorities arrested 68 people, including a priest and the head of a Catholic volunteer group, in an alleged mafia scheme to steal millions of dollars earmarked for migrants. Investigators said the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta mob had secured servicing contracts at a migrant center using the priest and the Catholic charity group. The charity then overbilled the government for migrants who didn't exist, netting some $40 million in bogus claims over the past decade. In 2007 alone, Father Eduardo Scordillo allegedly pocketed $145,000 for spiritual services he offered refugees. Police accused the priest of organizing the whole scheme. In 2015, 44 Roman politicians and businessmen were accused of rigging public contracts for migrants. And has Pope Francis made capital punishment a mortal sin? During a homily this past week at the Santa Martha Chapel, he again spoke out against the death penalty, this time comparing it to slavery. He made the argument that in modern times, we understand slavery is a mortal sin. Previously, he said, some say that this could be done because these people did not have a soul. The same goes for the death penalty. For a time, it was normal. Today, we say that the death penalty is inadmissible. Last year, Pope Francis declared, quote, "The commandment, thou shalt not kill, has absolute value and applies both to the innocent and to the guilty." The Catechism of the Catholic Church still leaves the door open to the death penalty as a prudential judgment of the state in very limited circumstances. And Pope Francis has effectively dismissed reports of the continuing apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Medjugorje. But according to one report, the Vatican is likely to authenticate the earliest apparitions near the small Bosnian town. The purported Medjugorje apparitions started in 1981 and have never been declared authentic by the Church. However, millions of pilgrims from around the world have visited the remote village, inspired by the apparitions. The Pope was asked to comment on Medjugorje as he returned from celebrating the 100th anniversary of the apparitions at Fatima. Francis said he knew he was being naughty for doubting the Medjugorje visions, but he insisted they, quote, "don't have much value," and derided the idea of the Mother of God acting as a postmistress delivering regular messages. Separately, according to Vatican journalist Andrea Tornielli of La Stampa, a commission formed by Pope Benedict XVI to investigate the Medjugorje apparitions has concluded, and the first apparitions were likely authentic, according to that commission. but they expressed grave doubts about later reports of continuing visions. And Roger Ailes, the man who transformed TV news by creating the Fox News channel, died on Thursday. He was 77. A former GOP operative who worked for Presidents Nixon, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, Ailes later turned his political and media savvy to running TV networks. In 1996, he accepted a challenge from Fox media titan Rupert Murdoch to build a news network from scratch to compete with CNN. Fox quickly became the ratings leader in cable news and emerged as a powerful force on the political scene. He was abruptly dismissed from Fox News in July of last year in the wake of sexual harassment claims against him. In a statement, his wife, Elizabeth, said, Ailes was a loving husband, a father, a loyal friend to many, and a patriot who was profoundly grateful to live in a country that gave him so much opportunity to work hard, to rise, and to give back. May he rest in peace. And the Will Wilder book tour is coming to a close for Book 2. On Saturday, May 20th, I'll be at the Half Price Books in San Antonio, Texas at 2 p.m. All the details are at RaymondArroyo.com. I can't wait to celebrate the conclusion of the book tour with you and your family. And the Trump White House is taking heat from all sides in the wake of the Comey firing, and comparisons to the Nixon administration abound. Are there really parallels? Political sage and author of the new book, Nixon's White House Wars, Patrick J. Buchanan, will tell us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, but this war is for the soul of America.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. That was my next guest, speaking at the Republican National Convention in 1992, predicting the culture war that has been raging ever since. Now, in May of 2017, a special prosecutor has been named to investigate alleged Russian interference in the U.S. presidential election and any Trump campaign collusion. With talk of impeachment in D.C., Trump's woes are being compared to Nixon's Watergate scandal. Here with analysis is a man who was at Nixon's side, syndicated columnist, former advisor to 3 presidents, including Richard Nixon, and author of the new book, Nixon's White House Wars, The Battles That Made and Broke a President and Divided America Forever. Welcome back to the program, Patrick J. Buchanan.
Good to see you, Raymond.
Great to
How are
see
you?
Look, I can't believe this book. This is a two-parter. I mean, you
Right.
issued, a few years ago, The Great Comeback.
Greatest comeback, Richard Nixon's 3-year comeback from 65 to 68. This takes him into the White House to the exit from the White House. It doesn't have as happy an ending.
Your timing couldn't be better with everything happening in D.C.
Well, exactly right. We're having our Saturday Night Massacre right here in D.C.
Well, let's not go that far.
No.
But I want to get into some of this, some of the news happening. You have Comey being fired by the president. A good idea?
Yeah, it's a good idea. It was not done correctly, but you can't have him in there. I think that Trump doesn't feel he's trustworthy, and there's no doubt his own attorney general or deputy attorney general. Really, the guy, you ought to get your own man in the FBI. I think so. I have no objection to him doing it, but you don't just send a letter over there and hand deliver it by one of your private security guards when he's out speaking on the coast.
And you have no successor picked. I mean, it would have been a good idea to pick a successor.
Sure, if you'd had a successor and you could have worked it out with Comey, and then you maybe had the two of them together, I think it'd been done very well. And the Democrats, how are they going to complain? You know, they blame Comey for doing the number on Hillary.
Right, and now you have a special prosecutor named in this investigation of Russian interference in the election and possible collusion with the Trump campaign. What do you make of this? Does this rise to the level of Watergate, which is what we're hearing all over the media?
No, and I shouldn't use Saturday Night Massacre. You're correct. It doesn't. Look, by the time of the quote Saturday Night Massacre in October of 1973, the whole White House had been decapitated. People who had done the Watergate burglary were in prisons doing time, and you had all of these events. And Nixon, decapitated the Department of Justice, fired the independent counsel or special prosecutor, and we shut the whole operation down. And of course, we had to reestablish it. This is simply letting go the head of the FBI. Even Comey said, the president's got a perfect right to fire me.
Tell me about this Rod Rosenstein, who's the Assistant Attorney General. He's come out, he authorized this. Now, some say this is retribution because the Trump White House was trying to say he was the one driving the bus on Comey's dismissal.
Well, Rosenstein, I've heard a lot about Rosenstein. He's very well respected as independent. He worked for George W. Bush. He's a Maryland U.S. attorney, and he worked for Barack Obama. And they did, in effect, hang him out to dry by saying that the memo he prepared, which Trump asked him to prepare, with all the egregious things that Comey had done, was the reason Trump finally decided to fire him. So they put that out, and Pence and everyone said, that's the reason Comey's going. And then Trump says the next day, I'm wanting to get rid of that guy since I walked into the White House. And so now that fellow, Rosenstein, without alerting the White House, sandbagged the President of the United States, named what is basically a special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, very respected guy, former director of the FBI. And I think he's going to be gearing up, and you're going to have a Watergate-style special prosecutor with a great number of FBI agents and special prosecutors working on it. And it's going to take a long time. This will take years like they do. And one of those took down Nixon, and another one got Bill Clinton impeached.
And Pat, you know how this thing rolls.
Sure.
They have wide latitude in their investigatory powers. They can tap into anything, and then they can prosecute at their own command. The biggest challenge I see, and I'd love your comment on this, once you have a special prosecutor pulling out West Wing staff and saying, we need to talk to you, we need to talk to you, they're all going to have to get lawyered up. What will happen, do you think, to whatever fragile cohesion exists in the White House today?
Well, I think a lot of people in the White House staff are looking, if they were in any way connected with decisions Trump made, which are now being investigated. You're right. I mean, with due respect, I got calls, come on over to the special prosecutor. I was hauled before the grand jury. I was hauled before the Watergate committee, and I had no role in the break-in or the cover-up of Watergate. And these fellows, I know fellows that work with me, they had to get lawyers. They weren't making much money, had to get lawyers. So I think what's going to happen is these prosecutors, what they do is they start going up the food chain, telling the lower folks, look, we don't want to prosecute you, take you into court. You got to give us this. We're going to have to give you some kind of sentence now. Tell us what happened here, and do you have anything else? But this is a long, long process, and you go up all the way up. And the ultimate goal, obviously, I mean, if you got an independent counsel, is that the President of the United States is something of a citizen under suspicion.
Wow. Talk about the Trump agenda. Well, before we do that, I want to show you this. This is Donald Trump speaking at the Coast Guard commencement in Connecticut on Wednesday, reacting to everything he's seeing in the media and the appointment of this special prosecutor. Watch.
Look at the way I've been treated lately, especially by the media. No politician in history, and I say this with great surety, has been treated worse or more unfairly. You can't let them get you down.
Your reaction to this, Pat Buchanan, as someone who was director of communications in the Reagan White House, you practically were director of communications in the Nixon White House too. Your reaction to this?
I think he's accurate in what he said. I've never seen anyone pounded and beaten up as viciously as Trump has for 18 months of the campaign and now, 110, 120 days of the presidency. However, he lets them get to him. I think he gets embattled with them every day. And I think that's a mistake. When I wrote those speeches for Spiro Agnew, it was after a full year when we were trying to get along and, advance our programs. We had to turn around and defend ourselves from an attack. But once we did and launched these two strikes against media, you move away and get back to your agenda. The problem the president's got, he's got a terrific agenda in a lot of areas. I really agree with him. It's one of the reasons I supported him. But he lets himself be distracted and driven off his message. But it gets to him. Look at him. You could see him right there.
There are many lessons. When I was reading your book, the memo you sent to Nixon deep into, when you were deep in Watergate after Haldeman was gone and everybody was flying out of the White House, you say, get back on message. We have to be proactive and on the offensive here. Meaning get back to what the American people sent you here for. If the Trump administration can't do that, and this White House is somehow undone, what will be the impact on the ideas that you have long championed and this agenda?
Well, I think the unique parts of the Trump agenda are ideas that we argued about in the 1990s campaigns, secure the border, America first, get out of these foreign wars, stop these trade agreements that are deindustrializing our country, taking all these jobs. And that is somewhat antithetical to the Republican conservative base in the Congress. And I think if Trump is the indispensable man to getting these through, and frankly, if Trump loses the support of a decisive margin in the House and Senate and in the party, and his staff is running over to the special prosecutor, I really wonder what he can get accomplished in that. And you're looking at a real bloodbath in 2018, and you're looking at something up on the Hill if he doesn't pull out of this dive.
Yeah. Do you ever stand back, Pat, and you're watching this play out? I'm certainly during the campaign.
Right.
These were the very same ideas, even the same slogans that you coined in 1992 and 1996 and 2000. America first, eschewing the globalist project, concern about border security and
Buchanan fence.
Yeah, Buchanan fence, pitchfork Pat and the Buchanan brigades, right down to America first and make America first again, which was your line. Do you get royalty checks from the Trump administration at this point?
Let me tell you, one of the reasons I was for Trump, I was astonished watching the campaign that he revived these ideas, and I predicted as soon as he came out, I said, look, he's in the 16 now, Sweet 16. He's going to be in the Final Four, and my guess is he's going to make the Final Two. I don't know if the Republican establishment can take him down because they don't agree with these ideas and they're a majority. But darned if he didn't take these all the way to the nomination and the presidency. Those are the ideas that won Wisconsin, the Northern Catholic folks in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan. That's what gave him the presidency of the United States. And let me say, both my wife Shelley and I were elated with his victory, and I am apprehensive about what this is going to do to his agenda, what we believe in, what we all worked for.
I was just in Boston, and a fellow Lou Murray there who worked the Trump campaign bumped into me during my travels there, and he said something I thought was interesting. He said, Trump stopped campaigning. He's now moved to governance. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton announced this week what is essentially a political operation called Onward Together, where she's going to keep, her campaign's just going to keep going on. Right. Was it a mistake to shutter the political operation in the Trump campaign? Should he have continued that to better message his agenda so that he wouldn't hit these roadblocks?
I think so, but let me say this. He has a number of times you can see that's where he feels he gets the electric strength, the connection with the people. You've seen him go out. He went out, I think one of them was Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he gets these mammoth crowds, and he gets sustenance, I think, and he gets energy out of them. But you can't do it quite as often as you mean on the campaign. That's what you did. You had 2 of those crowds every day. Right. And the trouble is, when the election's over, the American people fall silent, and the voices in the city rise up and get louder and louder in the city. And the deep state is coming after Donald Trump.
Let's talk for a moment about 2 quick news items before we dive into Nixon and his last years and the lessons to be learned. All across parts of the South, in my hometown of New Orleans, in Richmond, Virginia, they are contemplating, and in the case of New Orleans, you can see the video, taking down these Confederate markers and statues of Confederate figures, including Robert E. Lee, P.G.T. Beauregard. Your thoughts on this? You're a historian. Your family fought in the Civil War.
Family fought in the Civil War, and my great-grandfather, he was at Atlanta holding a musket when Sherman's army's coming down and to burn the city, and he was captured and put into a Chicago prison. He was the aggressor in the war, not Sherman. But look, I think it's appalling. I mean, the statue of Lee is magnificent. I've seen it. And the other one, the 1874 statue, the uprising against the Andrew Johnson's policy and Grant's policy and the rest of it. I mean, this is an event in history. It's part of American history. The war is the most written about thing in American history. And to tear these down, it's really a secular desecration is going on, and it's really iconoclastic, and it's something you expect of barbarians.
Mitchell Andrew Down, the mayor of New Orleans, he would say that these are symbols of racism. They splinter a community, they divide the community, and that without them, you can imagine a new future together. You would say what?
If that's what you're doing, then you're not going to have any unity, because the people that believe that those people fought for their land, their independence from the Union, just as we fought for our independence from the British. That is, it was an heroic event. It was an evil event. Slavery was an evil thing. But good heavens, if you tear down the statues of, I just came by Union Station. There was Columbus up there.
Yeah, he may be the next to come down.
That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to write a column and say, look, Columbus is up there in front of you. But I mean, what is going on in this country? It does reflect the fact that in terms of belief and what's in their hearts and what they love and what they hate, we're 2, 3, 4 countries. We're not one country anymore.
You know, this reminds me of something you wrote in 1969 in a memo to Richard Nixon. You write, America is no longer one nation and one people, but a land divided by war and race and culture and politics. You still feel that way?
Oh, I do indeed, even more so now, but it's more evenly divided now. We won a 49-state landslide, taking those arguments, but there's no doubt about it. That's a consequence of the 60s. Let me tell you, I grew up in D.C., in the D.C. of Eisenhower. I used to caddy at Burning Tree when he'd come over there, and even John F. Kennedy. It was basically a united country in terms of beliefs and their fundamentals of Christianity and how we got your moral beliefs and things. All of that, by the end of the 60s, at least on the campuses, all of that was thrown out, the basis of your morality, of your culture and everything. And something new and different, secularist certainly, hedonistic was coming in, and that philosophy of life, if you will, has captured a huge part of the country. And it's behind that deep divide, and it's hard for me to ever see us coming together again.
You know, in 1969 and in the subsequent campaign of Nixon, he really won by embracing the Buchananite idea of the silent majority.
Exactly.
Which was yours.
Phrase.
Why was he able to win using that? Donald Trump was able to win with that Buchananite mindset and even the title, the silent majority, but Pat Buchanan couldn't.
Well, because when we ran in 1992, I mean, I came 10 weeks off a cable news show and challenged the President of the United States, who was beating me about 65 to 15. And so we did come close and challenge him with the
gap to 15 points.
Yeah, the ideas we raised really got a tremendous reception, and we came close to the President in New Hampshire and Georgia, and then were wiped out. But the point is, the issues were not mature. When I went out there, I went down to the fence at Tijuana, for example, and a congressman took me down. He knew the problem. He showed me the problem. And I said, obviously, 5,000 people walking in every weekend, you need a fence here to protect it at least 11 miles inland. By the time I got in 96, it had moved over to Tucson, you know. But what happened is, by the time Trump came in here, I mean, in the first 10 years of the 21st century, we lost 6 million jobs in 55,000 factories. Then you could get up and say, we're being deindustrialized, we're losing factories and jobs, and people say, you bet we are. Here's what we lost in Ohio, to communities, towns, states. The devastation of failing to adopt policies by Bush, by Clinton, by Bush II, by Obama, left the consequences in there, in the country, that people looked at and said, Trump is right when he's talking about this. And at least he identifies the causes of it, and he's going to do something about it. And the other Republicans are swimming along ideas, you know, that worked in the late Reagan years, but we're not in that era anymore.
What was the turning point for you, Pat? I mean, because you were a free trader, you didn't raise any hackles when Reagan signed his immigration order and allowed the amnesty to take place.
No.
What happened in the late Reagan era into '92 when you decided to take on George H.W. Bush?
Well, there's one, you know, the trade thing was, Milton Friedman wrote me a letter in 1991, 92, it says, Patrick, you're doing the devil's work here. Exact phrase. But the real thing that changed was the end of the Cold War. I mean, this is the cause of my life. I'd gone into journalism in 60, 61, 30 years, 3 presidencies and things. That's what we fought again, to defeat the Soviet Empire. And all of a sudden, the Soviet Empire collapsed, the Soviet Union comes apart, communism is dead, Europe is free. We said, okay, what is our foreign policy now? And then you start looking at what's happening. Why don't we build up our country, and what is bringing it down? So you think all this through, and you come to the conclusion that, you know, free trade, and then I wrote a book on it, that free trade, that wasn't the way the country was built. You read back into the foreign policy and the history of the country, and you came up with these ideas, and that this is the way this is new. And I agree with you. I was a free trader. I was very high on, immigration, pro-immigration. I was for every measure in the Cold War, except for Reagan putting those guys in Lebanon.
Right.
But at the end of the Cold War, this is a new world. People said, look, it is and was an epical event. Something has changed. It's like after World War I, the Habsburg Empire is not coming back.
Right, you got to
figure
something else out.
And so in all of these countries, the Brits and the French are still going up there collecting the colonies. It's not going to last, friends.
When I was reading Nixon's White House Wars, I kept thinking there's a Catholic strategy that you unveil here,
They talk
which
about
was
the Southern strategy.
Yeah, they talk about the Southern strategy. They never talk about the Catholic strategy, which was yours. Tell people what that is. How did it contribute to Nixon's success and Trump's, by the way?
And Reagan's.
And Reagan's.
Okay, here's how. The Northern Catholics were the Catholic community I grew up in. My father's folks, the folks at the Holy Name Society and the Catholic schools, they were Democrats, all of them Democrats. They were Truman. They didn't like Dewey, So they were Truman, but however, socially, culturally, politically, in a lot of ways, they were, they have no objection to Social Security, but what are these kids doing burning down their campuses? What are they doing with, the sexual revolution, all these revolutions, gay rights and all these things? And culturally, it was profoundly offensive. Also, you got abortion, and you got handing out birth control and the rest of it, and so they were alienated from their party, and they were strongly anti-communist. So we told Nixon, I said, look, the Catholics are the decisive vote that gives all of these northern states to the Democratic Party, and they're naturally more allied with us. They may disagree with us on right to work, and they may disagree with us. The Republicans, we're going to chop everything up. So we can reach these folks culturally, socially, and on these issues. And the Lord blessed us with George McGovern as the nominee of the Democratic Party. For each we're going to crawl to Hanoi and stuff. These people don't crawl to anybody. So we brought the Catholic vote in the North, shifted over. Nixon got 22% of the Catholics in '60, 33% in '68, 55% in '72. Brought all of them through in the northern cities. And then we brought the Wallace folks in the Deep South and the conservative Southern, patriotic, but they like pork and all those things. You got to accommodate them, And so you got them on all of these issues. And what we had is the Goldwater-Nixon coalition inside the party, Northern Catholic, Southern Protestants, 49 states to 1 in '72. Reagan put 49 states to 1 in 1984. Quick statement about Reagan. I went into his White House in '85. I said, congratulations, Mr. President, 49 states to 1, you lost only Minnesota. He said, I didn't lose Minnesota, Pat. He was telling me he thought they stole it.
They stole it. Let's talk for a second, Pat. There is a memo in the book where you relate to Nixon your opinion of the media, and you say, the media is to us what the mongoose is to the cobra. Do you still think that stands true?
Oh, it's even more so with Trump, because the media are much more open about their hostility and dislike of Trump, and certainly Trump is much more open and constant about his detestation of the media. Really, this is a war going on here. Teddy White described Nixon and the Washington Post as two scorpions in a bottle. One hates the other, and the other hates them. And I think with Trump, there's no doubt about it. But I will say this: I mean, don't believe a constant war with the press is the right approach, but the press isn't going to go away. Somebody's going to lose this war, and the press lost with Nixon in '72, but they sure got him back in '74.
Now we have to remind everybody, this is the man talking who wrote the speech for Agnew that savaged the press, and of course his numbers went through the roof. But you think Trump leans on that trope too often?
He does. I mean, we wrote two speeches, but they're fairly high, very high level. They talked about the power and the bias and the bigotry of the network. 20 people running what goes through the networks, and 2/3 of the country relies upon, and how we ought to have dispersed this power. And I mean, it was a powerful argument. I had journalism teachers who were very liberal that said, "Where did you get that? That's what I believe too." And so I mean, that worked. And then the New York Times and the Washington Post attack a week later also worked. Important thing, they were televised by all three networks. But again, to every day go after the media, I don't know that it's, I mean, you ought to move off that. I mean, Nixon talked about that, and we all talked about it. Agnew, now he should calm him down. We should focus on this.
Right.
get to talking about the agenda and the issues.
It was a way to get you back to the
I will
agenda.
say this: they wanted the red meat out in the provinces.
They got it. Let's talk for a second, Pat. I mean, while we're talking about media, Roger Ailes died this week. Really a great innovator at both CNBC and later at Fox. He created an alternative media source that became a refuge for so many people. With his removal, some think it might have been a choreographed removal. Does this leave Trump's movement and your ideas vulnerable?
Yes, it does. I mean, Fox is not all behind the specific Trump issues. Trump is the indispensable man here, but I agree with you. He's got talk radio behind him. He's got a good presence on the internet, and he also has but Fox is in a way indispensable, I think. And if Fox departs, I think some of the Republicans depart. You lose your margins. You can't get anything done. So you just play out the game.
Wow.
The rest of the game.
I wish we had another hour, but I need to ask you two quick questions. The Death of the West, a book you wrote 20 years ago, was really about the demographic winter coming not only to Europe, but to the United States as well, but particularly Europe. 20 years later, looking at what's happening in Europe, you see what? And would you change anything you wrote in that book?
Requiescat in pace for Europe, in my judgment. None of these, not a single nation in Europe, except maybe Iceland's got a birth rate that will enable it to replace its existing native-born population. People are dying now coming across the Mediterranean. Some statistics I got from the UN recently, there are 1.1 billion people in Africa today, 2050, 2 billion, 2100, 4 billion. They're not going to stay there under the destitution and despotism. They're all coming to Europe. The Europeans are dying out, and in addition now, people are reacting there. Look at the secessionist movements, the rejection of the EU, the demand to secure the borders. All of these issues are raising up these parties, and none of them has gone over the top except for Brexit yet. Right. But they're going to continue to grow. But when you look at the long run, it is hard to be sanguine about the future of Western civilization.
Final question, Pat. You who were such a pioneer, not only in communications politically, but in television. You were one of the pioneers in television and cable TV.
Crossfire's responsible for a lot.
Right. When you look at the whole world now, the hyper-politicization of everything, from sports to entertainment to music, I mean, there is very little that unites us today that isn't ideologically charged. What is the answer? How do we stay together? What holds us together as a people?
You don't, because the media, I think Crossfire was an excellent show, and I was talking to someone else earlier. It was an excellent show, back and forth, and presented, left and right in America, and cultural issues. But what we got now is everyone gets on television. It's 24-hour cable. It's ongoing, and there's a premium on conflict. And the more hostile the conflict, the better, because that's better ratings. So that's all propelling all of these people to, get more and more deeply into that. You're on shows now where you can't understand. I'm sitting there.
Know what they're saying.
I can't understand the people sitting beside you.
No, they may as well be speaking farce.
I don't know whether it was Saturday Night Live. They had that thing they showed where we were going. They had Larry King there, and they had 25 boxes.
All around, like the Brady Bunch, metastasized.
They're all talking.
Yeah, everybody's talking at once. Yeah. Patrick J. Buchanan, thank you so much for being here.
Right.
The book, Nixon's White House Wars, The Battles That Made and Broke a President and Divided America Forever, by Patrick Buchanan, is available at bookstores and online everywhere. Go grab it. When we return, Pope Francis and Donald Trump will meet next week at the Vatican. What might they discuss? Former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Jim Nicholson, will weigh in. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. On Wednesday, May 24th, Pope Francis will receive U.S. President Donald Trump at the Vatican as part of Trump's first official trip abroad. The two men have very different opinions on migration and climate change, so will they be able to find common ground? And what does each man hope to gain from the meeting? Here to preview the visit and give us an insider's perspective is former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Jim Nicholson. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. What do you make, first of all, of this overall visit? The president going to these three capitals of monotheistic religion in the world, Islam, Judaism, Catholicism, and Christianity.
I think it's a wonderful idea. It's a very clever idea on the president's part to go to the capitals of these three great monotheistic religions on his first international visit as the President of the United States. A great amount of the derivative problems we have in the world today relates back to religion, religious differences and religious suppression. And so this gesture of meeting with each of those, and I'm sure those discussions will also point out, as we used to, and as Pope John Paul II used to, is to say, religion is not a zero-sum game. You know, when he used to say to me, Ambassador Nicholson, can we get people to stop killing in the name of God?
Yeah, that seems to be the message of this visit, or will be. One of the first visits he makes, he's stopping in Saudi Arabia, President Trump is, and he will be hosted by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and around them will be 50 leaders of primarily Sunni leadership from major countries in the Middle East. A good idea? I mean, can he really initiate a reform of Islam, which seems to be in the offing here?
Well, it's needed, and you know, he's an unconventional, sort of unprecedented kind of leader, and that's a real creative stroke. And if he could stimulate them to do that, so that they would, you know, modulate their views and to impede the Mojave, the exportation of hate that has come out of Saudi Arabia has been funded by the Saudis for so long. That would be a great step forward.
Yeah. Let's talk about the papal visit when President Trump arrives at the Vatican. These two men have had words before. We highlighted some of them in the headline segment. What do you think this visit will look like? I mean, there are two meetings, one with the Pope and then one with the Secretary of State. The head of the Vatican Secretary of State.
Secretary of State and the Secretary for Relations with State.
And that will be probably a little more tense than the meeting with the Pope.
I don't think either one of them will be tense. The Pope will be gracious and cordial, and President Trump will be as well. But they have, you know, have some fence to mend, I think, over some past altercations verbally. It'll be a great opportunity for them to meet, to get acquainted, to develop a friendship, an acquaintanceship, and I hope a partnership, because together the sum is equal to greater than the parts, because you know, one represents the head of a great spiritual superpower, and President Trump the head of a great temporal superpower, both dedicated to the proposition of enhancing human dignity around the world, which is made up of people being able to live peacefully with enough to eat, with hope and opportunity and justice. And that's really what both of those sovereign entities are about.
Well, and the White House is saying they will probably talk about human trafficking. They'll talk about lifting people out of poverty, and of course peace, and how to establish that in the world.
Religious freedom.
One of the other things is there's some stories speculating that Pope Francis might convert President Trump on climate change. You think that's in the offing?
No chance.
Okay, you'll leave it at that?
Well, you know, I think the science is so inconclusive. And the other irony, and this is a view of mine, and I've expressed it to the Pope, is that if you cut carbon consumption, there's 1 billion people in the world that still don't have electricity. And the most expeditious way to get that is to have coal-generating power plants. And it's also a fact that the richer a country becomes, the cleaner it gets. But you have to start out. And so the Holy Father, by wanting to deprive those undeveloped countries of coal generation and rely on these alternatives, I think is a false choice. I think they need to be able to get electricity so they can refrigerate their medicine and pump water and be able to read at night and the things that are needed to have an elevated life.
Yeah, to build a society from there. It has been speculated, and these are speculative reports, but that Donald Trump may appoint Callista Gingrich as his selection to be your successor as U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. Your advice to her, what would you advise given the differences between these two men? You were in a fairly good position in that the President and the Pope were aligned on so many issues. She would not enjoy that kind of alignment.
Well, these two people, Pope Francis and President Trump, they can get aligned because they have far more things that they agree on in common that they disagree on. We've covered some of them, but they're the primacy of life, of religious freedom, trafficking, taking care of those that are, you know, underfed and disenfranchised. They share a passion for that, and that could be the beginning of a very important friendship and relationship.
And you would suggest to her what?
Well, so that she could be a great interlocutor, great intermediary. That's a wonderful opportunity that she's going to have there. And I'm sure that she would welcome that.
Very good. Ambassador Jim Nicholson, thank you for being
Always
here for
a
your
pleasure.
insights.
Thank
The
you.
pleasure is ours. When we return, I'll speak with Dr. Meg Meeker about the unique relationship between fathers and their kids, as well as her new book, Hero, When the World Over Live continues. Stay right there. Thank you.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest has spent more than 3 decades practicing pediatric and adolescent medicine, as well as counseling teens and their parents. She's a regular contributor to LifeSet.com, and her latest book concerns the crucial relationship between fathers and their kids. It's called Hero, Being the Strong Father Your Children Need. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Meg Meeker.
Oh, thank you.
So great to
nice
have
be
you
here,
back.
Raymond. Yeah.
I want to start with this thing. Why are dads so important and so determinative in the outcome of their children and how they'll grow up?
Well, you know, I could cite a lot of research for you, and I do put it in the book.
You do?
Yes, and so I really wanted to do that right up front. But everybody who's been a child knows how huge dad is. You either have a huge father wound, or you have this adoration for your father. But kids are tied to their fathers really with a gold cord, and from the moment they're born, they have a huge need to have dad protect them, and they want to trust him and give them love. And it's very different from a mother's love.
Yeah. Well, you talk about in the book how we expect our fathers to be the hero and the protector and the example for us. Why are men, dads, reluctant to step into that role?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, it's a great question. I think they've been pummeled. If you look at the media, and it's really happened over the past 30 years, but if you look at the media and you look at the way they've been portrayed, they're dummies, they're the butt of jokes, they need a snarky 11-year-old to straighten them out. And even though we say, well, that's just TV, but it has a big effect. In addition to that, you've got the women's movement over the past 30 years has championed women so heavily that good fathers have just sort of drifted into the background. You know, whenever you fight a revolution, which feminism is a revolution, there are casualties.
Yeah.
And the casualties, unfortunately, are our dads. And as a pediatrician, I just see how critically important fathers are. And I said, this is my Meg Meeker answer to beginning to get our dads really engaged with their kids again.
What do you tell fathers, and some might be watching, who had abusive fathers or absent fathers?
Yes.
They don't have a vibrant model that they can remember personally.
Yes.
You would advise what?
Yes. Well, I tell them, I work with the NFL, and a lot of those men, they recruited me for that reason, because a lot don't have dads. The first and foremost thing I say is you need to reconcile what you wanted from your dad and you didn't get. You have to do that so you don't carry it into your future. And then I talk to them about God the Father. Will you allow God the Father now to direct you? And then I say you can overcome all of that. And great parenting, Raymond, is simple, but it's so hard. And then when you point that out, they're off and running, and they're amazing. So anybody can be a great dad because God wired him with everything he needs.
You write that children feel the need to earn a father's love. How does that translate to the dad, and what's the lesson and the takeaway for him?
Yeah, and what I tried to do in Hero is fathers will say, well, I'm not a hero, you should see all the messed up. I said, no. From your child's perspective, you are. So this is a book about unveiling how a child sees a father. So a child sees a father as having a different authority than mother. Every child believes, now this is, again, what goes on in a child's head.
Yeah.
Every child believes mom has to love you. She's mom. Because if mom doesn't love you, why live? You know, mom is where love starts and ends, and she's the anchor in your life. But in their minds, fathers don't have to love you. You know, and when a dad chooses to love you, boy, are you something. I don't know where it comes from, Raymond, but all I know is I've seen it over and over and over, and that's why fathers need to understand that what they do and say with their kids changes who those kids become.
And a big part of this, you write about this in the book, it's not doing anything spectacular.
No.
It's the power of presence.
Exactly. And I tell a lot of stories there. You know, so many fathers now feel they need to jump through so many hoops to get it right. They're so afraid they're going to get wrong. And I'm there to tell them, you're not going to get it wrong. Love them fiercely. You know, you can make your mistakes. Make sure, live a good life in front of them. I talk about leading and not coaching their kids.
Right, what does that mean, leading, not
Yeah,
coaching?
yeah. Well,
People see that and go, well,
what is this? Well, you can tell I work with the NFL. Yeah.
A lot of NFL players.
Yeah,
and
I did that on
quarterbacks, and
purpose.
I felt very small after.
No.
So,
So, but really, a coach sits on the sidelines and says, "Go do this, and go do this, and go do this," and bosses the kids around and tells them what to do. A leader walks in front of the child, shows them how to live, and says, "Follow me."
And you say kids are great mimics, and it's important to model
They
behavior.
mimic everything. They're doing it all the time. So what a dad needs to realize is he's mimicking me, so what is he seeing and what is he mimicking?
Talk for a second about what girls need and expect from their father, and what does the data tell us that they glean from their father that they need for the rest of their
Well,
lives?
they need a sense of value. They need a sense that they're worth something. They need protection, and they tell us this. You know, the series Twilight, wildly popular with pre-adolescent girls, and they say, you know, somebody pulled them because they want someone in their own lives to protect them and love them like the main character. Isn't he a werewolf? I don't know.
Well, he's a vampire.
He's a vampire, sorry.
Yeah.
But anyway,
But a glistening, very buff vampire.
So in other words, girls will do anything to get attention and affection from a man. And if they don't get it at home, they will look for it anywhere, even if it's not real. And fathers during the teenage years are so hesitant to move into their daughters' lives because they take them personally. They think, well, she doesn't like me. She yells at me. She tells me she doesn't want me with. So they back out. Exact wrong thing to do.
Okay, what do you tell the father whose daughter slams the door at him and Princess doesn't want to talk to him, and so he gives in to her often? You would say what?
No, don't do that. Here's what I say. Trust your instincts. Your instincts will say, she's in trouble. I need to stand my ground here. And if you don't take your daughter personally, you can deal with the slamming doors. When your daughter spits fire and doesn't want to hug you and is slamming doors, it has nothing to do with you, Dad. It's everything to do with her. So don't take her personally. Stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to continue to follow her, continue to talk to her, go into a room and say, you know what, I just love you too much to renege on this rule. Sorry, you can't go out with that guy. That's what my dad did with me, and I didn't talk to him for 4 days. But I'll tell you, years later,
it was the best thing for you.
It was the best thing. I always also tell dads this: if you're in a situation where you're really ready to give in and do something you know you shouldn't do or allow your daughter to, think of when she's 25. Do you want her to look at you and say, Dad, what were you thinking? Why did you let me go to that party and drink? Where were you?
Yeah.
So think of it that way. I believe, Raymond, men want to protect their daughters, but they're beaten down.
Well, the culture has told us you don't want to be an authoritarian. You're an authoritarian. You're a patriarch. We don't want that. We don't want that.
Yeah.
And that has made men reluctant to be that authority figure. And you say they have to be.
They have to be. They have to act on their God-given instincts, and that's how they win their kids. But look what's happening with children. I mean, kids out there, we have a crisis, Raymond. We have a crisis.
You mean the sexualized culture that we're dealing with?
The sexualized culture, but also the fathers who have faded into the background because mothers can't be two people. They can only be one great mom. So they need to recruit help, whether they have a son or a daughter, for a male role model to say, this is what a good man looks like.
And you recommend praying with your kids, even if you're not a particularly religious person.
Why? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because kids love it. Kids are more open to God, first of all, than parents are. That's just a reality. Kids will tell me things like they see angels and they do this, and their parents will go, oh, stop that. And I go, no, let her talk, let her talk. But praying with your child, first of all, lets your child know you care and you love him. And even if the child says, I don't want a prayer, praying out loud for your child makes him feel safe and comfortable, and it also brings that child closer to God. It brings God into the picture, and there's an intimacy in prayer that a parent shares with a child. It's really hard to be estranged from a child and pray with them. You can't. So it closes those gaps, and then God does amazing things.
Yeah, well, I love that you talk about prayer. You also talk about reading to and with your children, which is a big passion of mine.
Yeah.
I just think it bonds you in a way. You're sharing a fictional experience, but you're also sharing your life experience with one another.
It's so intimate. It's face-to-face time. I quote a study in there. It says fathers who read to their or children whose fathers read to them from 6 months of age on test significantly higher on IQ tests at 3 than children whose fathers don't. You say, well, why? Why is this? Well, we think it's because fathers speak differently to their kids. They don't use as much baby language. Mothers do.
Yeah.
But fathers use a full word. Yeah.
And so it gives the kids a different, it broadens their vocabulary. And
let me tell you.
The tenor of dad's voice is different.
Yes, and when a dad shows a child he wants to be with them and spend time with him, what does that do to a child's self-esteem? They feel larger than life. And you and I know men in their mid-40s and 50s who are still trying to prove to their dad they made it.
Yeah.
That love and need for attention and admiration and from your father is so primal. It's so strong. It really drives very smart men in the workplace.
Your final message to dads in our final moments. What do they absolutely need? And we were talking about reading books. This is one you absolutely, particularly you dads or new fathers or old fathers, you need this. Particularly if you're having difficulties with your kids.
Absolutely.
A lot of practical strategies here. What would be your overarching message to them?
I would say that you are larger in your child's life than you ever imagine. And if you sit behind your child's eyes and see who you are, which was what Hero is all about, your life will never be the same. And you got everything you need today to be a great dad.
Dr. Meg Meeker, thank you for being here. We are going to do an extended segment with Dr. Meeker. You can see that online. I'll tweet it and Facebook it out. But the book is Hero, Being the Strong Father Your Children Need, by Dr. Meeker. It is available now at bookstores everywhere and online, and worth your time. It's your children's future. You have to invest in it. And all it takes many times is showing up. That's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, as are the details of my final book stop in San Antonio. Will Wilder 2, almost done. Be sure to join us next week. We have an exclusive Newsmaker interview with Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, the head of the Vatican doctrinal office and the second most powerful man in Rome. It is a must-see. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.